just to let you know, there's discriminatory language and content in this episode. Okay, Emmanuel.
Yes, Kai?
What is the first image that comes to mind, first sort of caricature even that you have when I bring up Richard Pryor?
Oh, man. Can I just say, I feel like the image that was fed to me is of this comedian who's really funny, but kind of
like a hot mess.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is, though, Emmanuel, you're not wrong.
I snorted cocaine for about 15 years with my dumb ass. I started off snorting little tiny pinches. Said, I know I ain't gonna get hooked. I don't know coke, you can't get hooked. My friends have been snorting 15 years, they ain't hooked. I started snorting little teeny, didn't even make noise. Coke etiquette, Jack.
Pass the album, please. No more for me.
6 months later.
I mean, that is like a meaningful part of what happened in Richard Pryor's life.
Yeah.
You know, I think there's more to that story, and particularly the questions around why. From BBC Studios and Pushkin Industries, this is Big Lives. I'm Kai Wright.
I'm Emmanuel Dzotsi.
We are both journalists and culture obsessives who love trying to understand the world through an individual person's life. These are architects of our culture, people who have just had a huge impact on the way we live, the way we take in art, the way we think of ourselves, but who have been flattened over the years. And so we want to bring them back to life, look into their complicated, big lives. And we're using the treasure trove of the BBC archive to do that. There is over 100 years of tape of some of the biggest cultural figures in our world. The BBC's got it, and so we're digging through it. So, listen, first off, the basics of Richard Pryor, if you don't know who he is a genre-defining comedian. Just if you talk to almost any comedian today, certainly of his era, they would say he's the GOAT, you know. He just had a titanic career, 5 Grammys. He was the first black person to host SNL.
Mm-hmm.
He first black person to make $1 million in a movie.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
Okay.
So as I've been rooting around in the archive for Richard Pryor, there's this clip I found of his daughter, Rain Pryor, in 2006. So it's right after he died. They did a documentary about his life. And she said this interesting thing. Listen to this.
There was always truth. He didn't make up things just to get a laugh or, you know, tell a story. That's the one thing that I love about the man, is that maybe at times you didn't know what Richard you were going to get personally, but you always knew you were going to get Richard, if that makes sense. You were always going to get the man, whether messed up or not. And he would tell you he was messed up.
And, you know, like that honesty thing, the telling the truth piece,
Right.
like that's the core Richard Pryor. That is like what was at the core of his fame and what people loved about him. And the messed up part also, you know, he is simultaneously, as you said at the beginning, just wildly self-destructive. But the two, I think they got something to do with each other. And, you know, that is the thing that I am drawn to. There's a way in which the disruptive behavior is why he had such a massive impact on the culture. And I want to talk about that.
Let's do it.
Welcome back. This is Big Lives, and we are talking about Richard Pryor. Okay, so Richard Franklin Lennox Thomas Pryor III.
It's always those sorts of names that someone is like, right, we're going to reproduce this and put it on a child 3 times.
3 times. 3 times. The third. I almost didn't take in the third part, right? He had a life, a young life, as complicated as his long name. Born in December 1940 in Peoria, Illinois, he grew up in a brothel.
Oh, okay.
Like an actual brothel. His mother was a sex worker. His father was a pimp and a boxer.
Whoa.
And his grandmother, you know, was really who raised him. She was like the big personality in his life. He called her mama. He talked about her a lot throughout his career. And here is, again, his daughter, Rain Pryor, talking about mama in that 2006 documentary.
Mama was proud of herself for having this whorehouse because it's the one thing that put food on the table. And my dad's perception in growing up with that was a little warped in that environment, and women were to be used and to be bought with money. And he sort of had that, I think, throughout, obviously, his entire life.
And yeah, if you grew up in a brothel in that way, and it's just like, it sounds like it's your family business.
Yeah, and family home.
That's your whole worldview.
Yeah. And not surprisingly, he was sexually abused as a child if you grew up in that environment. And then at age 14, gets thrown out of school because they discover he lives in a brothel.
Wait.
Yes, sir.
So he basically came into school and they're like, oh, we discovered that you're living in a brothel, which is potentially like unsafe situation, and we're just going to kick you out.
That's right. You need help. Go. So,
Okay.
He gets kicked out of school.
Right.
And he does, though, go and find sanctuary in this place, this community center in Peoria, where he meets what he calls the angel in his life. It's this woman who's a drama teacher and sees real potential in young Richard Pryor and starts coaching him and giving him opportunities to perform. And he starts heading down this road. So 1963, he moves to New York City with $10 in his pocket. Right?
Classic, yeah.
$1 and a dream. And he starts performing in the Greenwich Village scene. And I don't know how much you know about that scene from the early 60s.
I don't know, mostly just like, but everywhere you walk, there's like Bob Dylan singing in some bar.
That's right. That's right. It's this intimate place, and, Bob Dylan, Woody Allen, Miles Davis, like John Coltrane, all these people are performing in these little clubs. The Village Gate is like one of the big ones. So Richard Pryor gets booked at the Village Gate on one of his first nights. He's opening for Nina Simone.
Wow.
I love thinking of like young Richard Pryor through Nina Simone's eyes.
Okay.
She's talking about he is so scared, right? Like to get up on that stage that apparently she says he shook like he had malaria. He was so nervous.
That is such a specific description that, of course, Nina Simone delivers.
Right. That the man shook like he had malaria. So she says to get him up on stage, she would rock him like a baby, like put her arms around him and just rock him till he calmed down. So she did that on the first night.
Right.
And then the next night was the same. And the next, I rocked him each time until he calmed down.
Wow. She like midwifed him into being, basically.
That's right. Yes. Nina Simone midwifed Richard Pryor. And, he says at the time, the kind of comedy he started to develop was essentially copying Bill Cosby. Right. So this is, the mid 60s. Bill Cosby is certainly the reigning black celebrity, but probably like one of, because he's on TV as a black man. That's really unusual at this time. Mm-hmm. And he's, Bill Cosby is like telling Cosby jokes, right? Like
Right. About children and somebody spilling something on a rug. Yes.
And so Richard Pryor thinks this is comedy, and so I'm going to do that. There's this clip I found from his closest collaborator in comedy, Paul Mooney.
He sort of modeled his career after Bill Cosby in the early stages, and that allowed him to be accepted by white audiences. With a tone of voice, if you didn't notice who you were watching, you might have mistaken him for Bill Cosby.
You can't get a cab in New York City, right? Especially when it rains. All the cabs are owned by one company, off duty. Right? Huh?
And he's pretty good at it, actually. And he starts to take off. And he gets on the Ed Sullivan Show. That's his big moment. And he starts doing these bits on the Ed Sullivan Show in the 60s and becomes known as a rising star as a consequence. This is the new Bill Cosby. Mm-hmm. But that is not going to hold for a man who grew up in a brothel.
Right, because what I know of Bill Cosby's comedies is it's clean for the most part. It's super clean. It's and I'm also not really about race ever.
It's not, distinctly.
Distinctively not about race.
Gets
ever.
on with white people, and so Richard Pryor is trying to get on with white people.
Okay.
So It's 1967. He's now become quite popular for doing this Bill Cosby kind of humor, right, on the Ed Sullivan Show, no less. And he's booked at the Aladdin Hotel in Las Vegas. And it's a big gig, right? Sold out audience. And he's standing backstage, you know, kind of weirdly reluctant to get on stage, looking out at the audience.
Right.
And he's looking out at like a sea of white faces. Like, it's just like a white audience. And he's like, I don't know, what am I doing? And he has what he describes that moment as epiphany, you know, like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. This is not what I want. I don't want to go out on this stage, you know, but he walks out anyway. And before he tells a single joke, right, like the very first thing he does is blurts out, "What the fuck am I doing here?"
Wait, what?
And he's just like, why am I here?
Oy.
You know, in the most profane way. So after he gets that out of his system,
Yeah.
he goes on and tries to do the gig that he's signed up for. He starts telling these jokes, right? And about midway through the set, he's just like, nah. And just walks off stage.
Wait. So he goes out on stage and is like, basically says the thing he's thinking, which is, why the fuck am I here? And then he recovers and is like, okay, let me get back to the clean joke. Sorry, folks. And then is like, actually, this sucks. I'm just going to go. And just walks off stage. And he's so petulant about it, he doesn't even walk off stage in the right direction. Like, he like deliberately walks off stage in like the wrong direction. So it's like awkward to get off the stage. And it's like a whole mess of a thing. That's my nightmare.
And it's the disaster that you think, right? Like his agent's like, you'll never work again. And indeed, he like stops getting booked. You know, he's pushed into the small clubs and college towns and stuff like that. Like, he's destroyed his career.
Right.
You know, but it's in this moment as a consequence that he starts to rethink that career. And he leaves New York and he moves to the Bay Area. Now, this is the 60s, right? And he starts getting involved in the sort of Bay Area counterculture. He starts getting involved with the Black Power movement, right? That grows up out of Oakland. And that starts to change his understanding of like the world and his place in it and what he could do. And he starts to think about comedy that is more raw and honest, right? And so he begins this process, and he says later, like, that he realized real comedy wasn't just telling jokes. It was about telling the truth. And just to sort of give you an example of where this kind of comedy goes.
Yeah.
So he starts making albums. 1971, his second album, it's called Craps, right? Like after the dice game. And it's a wildly profane album. And I want to play you like one of the jokes.
Okay.
It's toward the end of the show. He goes on this truly profane riff about sex. And then like the last 25, 30 seconds of this is what I want you to pay attention to, but hear it all. And yes, dear listener, this is the clip with the discriminatory language and content.
I was going to say, this is the stuff you needed the warning for.
So be ready. All right, so here's Richard Pryor, 1971.
You know, like, you can't talk about fucking in America, right? People say you're dirty. But if you talk about killing somebody, that's cool. I don't understand it. Myself, I'd rather come.
Oh, wow.
I've had money and never felt as good as I felt when I come. So nothing matter, but when you get in a nut, especially if it's a girl. Niggas be signifying doing your act. I'm like, I knew, you know they all in trouble. I was the only dude in the neighborhood would fuck this faggot, though. Yeah. A lot of dudes don't play that shit, you know, because in the daytime, I don't fuck no faggot, man. At night, you kissing... Right, but it's embarrassing because I met the dude like 10 years later. Hi, Rich.
So, man, this is 1971 that he does this joke, right?
Okay.
when I heard this for the first time, obviously not in 1971, many years later, I heard this album, but I was a teenager, and it was the first time in my life I had ever heard a man, certainly a black man, talk matter-of-factly about having sex with another man.
Wow.
And he uses, this language and this framework, but he's like saying, we all do it. Like, people have sex, men have sex with each other.
Right.
Why do y'all act like you don't do it? And it just blew my mind. Like, I just have an emotional memory of hearing it, and being like, what?
Well, yeah, because it's interesting because the way he says it is very matter-of-factly. Yeah. And actually, the way the audience reacts is a laugh that also is normalizing.
That's right. That's like, oh, you told the truth. We all know, like, we're all a little gay, But that's the kind of truth-telling we're talking about. And, he goes on telling these kind of jokes about his bisexuality throughout his life.
Wow.
And so a couple things about this, right? One, it's a success. Like a few years earlier, he was doing Bill Cosby jokes on Ed Sullivan. This pivot to his more profane self is a success, but it's specifically a success with black people. And this stuff is a hit. Craps, in particular, was kind of a cult classic for black people. That's how I encountered it. My parents had that album, and I was digging around in it, decades later. But it would be the beginning of his success. He had a concert film that in that same year that was a big hit. His next album, which was titled "That Nigger's Crazy." Okay, that was
he's leading it.
Yeah,
he's leading it.
That's a huge hit. But even still, he's wrestling with this fame and with his place in the culture, and it kind of comes to another head with the gay sex thing. I'm going to tell you a story about that. So it's 1977, and he's a superstar by this point, right? And he's booked as the headliner for a show at the Hollywood Bowl in Los Angeles that's a fundraiser for gay rights, right?
Okay.
So now this is the moment in the history of gay rights where it's like the movement has moved from Stonewall and liberation and sexual liberation to a proper civil rights movement, right?
Right. They're able to command venues like the Hollywood Bowl.
Exactly. And what goes along with a proper civil rights movement is a more proper kind of conversation.
Yes.
Right? About who you are, And so the event happens and it's packed. There's 17,000 people there, mostly gay men. Most of the other acts are super it's got a human rights framework, right?
Yeah.
To it. And so people are talking about human rights, Okay. And Richard Pryor goes on, and he gets on stage and he's clearly agitated. You can see he's agitated. He's pacing around, and the first thing he says is, "I came here for human rights. What I found out is it's really about not getting caught with a dick in your mouth."
So not the proper,
he's
tailored statement that they probably wanted for this benefit.
Right. What about sex, y'all? Isn't that what we're here talking about? But the crowd responds exactly as you did. They love it, this is now classic Richard Pryor. That's right. Shake it up, And so he goes on to tell a gay sex joke, right? He goes back to he talks about the first time he gave a blowjob. and he names names. What was the guy's name? Wilbur Harp. In 1952 is the first man he sucked.
Oh, not that poor man.
Yeah.
I hope he was out. That's all I have to say.
I do too. And, and he describes the experience as beautiful. And he says, everybody was sucking Harp's dick. I was the only one to bring him roses. Right. So it's the same sort of setup as that craps joke.
Right. It's the same sort of thing.
And so people are loving it. They're eating it up in the audience. Right. But the whole time he's telling this joke, he is enraged. Inside he's enraged because backstage he had seen, so this is a pretty white event, and there had been this black dance troupe that went on and had some technical trouble and asked for help. And he witnessed the white production staff be dismissive of them and not help them. And then there was a white dance troupe that had the same technical trouble and they got all the help they needed.
Naturally, yeah.
And he was just livid about this. And so he tells these reverse jokes. The audience is with him. They're all in his palm. They're laughing and enjoying it. And then he stops and says, "How can faggots be racist?" And he proceeds, and that's a quote, he uses that language, and proceeds to light into them for being hypocrites.
Wow.
So then he just lays into them for essentially for being hypocrites, for not wanting to stand up for black people in the way that they now want everybody to stand up for them. And this is Los Angeles, right?
Yeah.
So he's like, where were you during Watts, and where are you for black civil rights? And it gets pretty bad. And he starts feeling himself in it, because he's mad. And he says, "I hope you all get arrested when you leave here, because, it's illegal to be gay. Like, sodomy is illegal." And that's just a really nasty thing to say to somebody.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so they're booing him and heckling him and all of that. And finally, he just turns around, puts his ass in the air and says, "Kiss my happy rich ass," and walks off stage.
Kiss my happy rich black man ass.
Yes. Which is still funny on top of everything else. This is, obviously, it's a horrible, the language is terrible and but, he's also telling a truth
Right.
that we are still arguing about, in the gay community. He is naming something, that we are still discussing. That,
Right.
the way white gay men will be there for their rights, but not for anything else, including for the rights of black gay people.
It's also just interesting because it feels like the whole point of the event was to sort of bring the gay rights movement into sort of like a more mainstream button-up sort of, to make it the sort of thing that your average do-gooder white housewife of that era probably could be like, "Oh, look at them. They're doing this thing." And he's refusing to basically keep it in that place. He's like, "No, let's talk about what we're really here to talk about."
Well, he can't. He's incapable.
Okay, so what is going on for him? Is he just rejecting just the whiteness of it all one more time?
Emmanuel, this is part of why I'm talking to you about this, because I don't fully know, but I think that it connects to something that is going on for the whole generation of black people, this post-civil rights generation for black people, right? So,
Right.
Here he is, he has found this success in these mainstream white spaces.
Right.
But these mainstream white spaces that are now letting black people into them are not, they haven't stopped being racist.
Right.
As we see at the Hollywood Bowl, right? They're still racist spaces.
They're still racist as hell. And he's also doing that thing. I don't know. There's this thing I feel like with black performers, and especially in that era probably, which is, we're only a couple decades removed from sort of the dance, black man dance kind of nature of minstrel shows and people performing for white people in a way that was totally black people were always the joke.
We're always the joke. And so now, are you the joke or are you laughing with me? So I'm sure he's wrestling with some of that. And adjacent to that is just what am I doing here, period? I need access to these white spaces in order to become rich and famous in the way that I want.
Right.
But these white spaces remain racist,
Yeah.
I kind of don't want to be here at all, but I do want to be here at all. And what do? Do I say something about the racism? Do I not say something about the racism? And, Richard Pryor's response to that seems to be when he short circuits is to spit in white people's face, right?
Right.
Go fuck yourselves,
Yeah.
right? But I will say part of my interest in him is my father, I feel like I watched go through this, as this man who, was the first this and the first that in his field. He was a doctor, and so he was routinely in whites only spaces. He really wanted to be in black spaces.
Right.
That's where he preferred to be. But to have the success he wanted, he had to be in these spaces. And I think it kind of curdled him, and for all of them, what ends up happening, and I don't understand why, I don't know why this happens, but all of them start to self-destruct. And I guess part of my, like, if you talk to a Black Gen Xer, like, this is a regular part of my conversation with my Black peers is thinking about this. Is this something that, like, your generation talks about? Do you have this?
I think it's something, honestly, in my generation when you talk to Black kids who grew up in suburban spaces. And just by existing, just by doing stuff, I'm the first of this. Every other Black person I'm meeting is the first person to do this or is exceptional in kind of some way by virtue of the fact we're in this room or this place. But I don't know, I feel like the stakes of it are way more real for like Gen Xers or like people who came before.
For
where
our
you're
parents.
just like, yeah.
And because part of why is the struggle to carry that, like what they do, how they carry that they had tried so hard to be there. He worked so hard to go from being, the kid that grew up in a brothel to standing on this stage, being so famous that they would book him for this, even though he obviously was not a fit,
100%. And also it's just like, it's so telling to me because he came up doing one type of comedy that was very white people safe. And then ultimately had a break with that. And then by necessity, kind of had to reshape himself in front of Black audiences.
In front of Black audiences, and then he was okay.
Right, and then he was okay, and then became famous doing that.
Yep.
But it still took him to the same place, where it's like he still ends up performing in front of white people. And as funny as you were describing this, it kind of reminded me of like what happened to Dave Chappelle many years later.
That's right. You know what? That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Where you're making all these jokes, you get famous for, like in Dave Chappelle's case, making the Dave Chappelle Show, which was like this sort of skit show that aired in like the early 2000s. And he got famous for like doing these very like avant-garde, risky, very race-focused, very honest jokes that Black people loved. And then eventually he had to stop because it's just like, wait, I feel like white people are laughing at this in a way that is making me very uncomfortable. And me being the biggest this show has ever been at the height of his fame, the attention he's drawing and trying to figure out just like, okay, how can I be this famous when I have white fans?
Right.
And in a white gaze.
And, maybe the comparison is apt as well because, like, I think, today's Dave Chappelle is a man who is self-destructed. And part of my interest in this is, like, the self-destruction that Richard Pryor engages in as a consequence of this stuff was epic. And I'm going to tell you about that after the break.
Okay.
Welcome back. This is Big Lives. We are talking about Richard Pryor, and we are now going to talk about his epic self-destruction.
Oh, boy.
All right. So June of 1980.
Yes.
Richard Pryor is wildly wealthy by this point. He has already been the first Black person to make $1 million in a movie. So, his Hollywood Bowl flame out, was not enough to derail him. He's that famous now. And he co-wrote Blazing Saddles. Do you know the movie Blazing Saddles?
I didn't know he co-wrote that.
Yes, sir. That's Richard Pryor.
Wow, okay.
So those things have happened. He's like killing it. Also, he is spending more than $250,000 a year on drugs, just on drugs alone. That's what he says in his memoir.
Wow.
And so June of 1980s, he's like on a days-long binge of freebasing cocaine. So it's been going on days. He's at his mansion in Los Angeles. It's this sprawling estate, and he's not having fun while he's doing this.
Yeah.
He's just really, really high. And, he has this moment where his manager describes it as like he's trying to deal with his guilt for the crime of being Richard Pryor, whatever the hell that means.
The crime of being Richard Pryor.
Whatever. I have no idea what that means, but that's what he's experiencing in the moment while he's on this like binge. And he takes a bottle of 151 proof rum that I guess he's drinking while he's on this days-long binge. He pours it over his head, and he lights himself on fire. a fireball erupts, engulfs his body.
Oh my God.
Because the freebase cocaine also has these volatile substances in it.
Oh, wow.
You know, flames cover more than half his body. He runs out of the mansion, past his security, out the gates, runs down the street, a streaking ball of fire.
Wow.
I mean, it's awful.
Yeah, that's terrible.
It's horrific. And, you know, he somehow survives this.
That was going to be my next question. So he survives that, but probably with like horrendous burns.
Horrendous burns. He has 6 weeks of recovery. I want to play some of that documentary from 2006 again, where people in his life try to make sense of this moment. And so you're going to hear from his daughter again and his son now, and from his like closest collaborator in comedy, Paul Mooney.
Mm-hmm.
So here's that.
He wanted to end his life. Sometimes you get to a point where you can't take anymore and you don't know how to get a way out of it, or, you know, you don't see a way out. And a lot of times you take matters into your own hands saying, this is the only option I have.
Richard was trying to kill himself. Definitely. Definitely.
What makes you say that?
Because it was the way he was acting before he did it. He was trying to get out of here. I'm sure of it.
He told me straight out, I didn't have an accident, baby. I tried to kill myself. I wanted it to stop. He just couldn't take it.
When you say couldn't take it, could you explain what you were talking about?
Well, Mama had passed away. Mama had passed away. The thing that was his rock, his foundation. Now what? Who's going to tell you off? Nobody in your life wants to tell you off. Why? Because you're Richard Pryor.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because when you told me the way in which you did it, I'm like, oh, that is a suicidal act.
Yeah, yeah. But at the time, who knew, you know?
Yeah,
it was like also just the act of a deranged drug addict, right?
Right.
You know?
Right.
But you think about like this balancing act he had been doing with himself, right? Of like chasing fame in this white space, you know, really wanting to be in these black spaces.
Yeah.
And I can imagine Mama, you know, his grandmother who raised him in a brothel,
Right.
Was probably a lot of like what made the balance right.
Right. It's like he has
You know?
this grounding presence in his life. Yeah, I could totally see a world in which his grandma is this grounding presence that reminds him where he comes from, that connects him to his childhood in that way.
Yeah. You know, so it's a horrible event. But classic Richard Pryor, he turns this into comedy. When he comes back from this in 1982, he makes a comedy film, Richard Pryor Live on Sunset Strip. It's his next concert film. And I would say it was my introduction to Richard Pryor. I remember watching that with my family, you know, and he tells the story of this moment as this long, drawn-out bit that becomes like one of his most famous bits. And I just remember watching my family, my father particularly, just tears crying, you know, at like that tears funny laugh you get when somebody's telling the truth that feels real to you.
Yeah, like that it hit close to home, actually,
You know?
for your dad and for others other people.
Yeah, of that generation of like, they got it, you know, like why he would. And I don't get it to this day. I don't get it. Why this impulse to self-destruction? You know, my father absolutely he wasn't a drug addict, but he self-destructed with like, he was a surgeon who treated people for diabetes and heart disease and preventable illnesses. And he died at 58 of diabetes and heart disease. Right. Like, and it just, you know, just constantly anything he could do to undermine his own health. And every time I am in conversation with other Black Gen X people, we talk about this and that they've seen in their parents or someone in their family. I don't understand it. I don't understand why it went to self-destruction. But I also, from someone from your generation, is this at all legible to you? Do you have any idea what I'm talking about?
I mean, it feels ridiculous to say this because it's so lower stakes than what we've talked about. But it's like, nobody wants to be the black guy at a white dance party in the middle of the circle. You know what I mean?
In the middle of the circle.
In the middle of the circle, of everyone looking on you and displaying that way. Like, there's something about that sort of experience, whether it's you're performing on stage in front of millions of people, whether it's you're a doctor like your father was. there's something about finding success and realizing that that success means that you have to exist in a society that your whole life has never wanted you, still doesn't really want you now, is being made to accept you. And like facing a choice, you either sort of fully embrace it, you lean in, and you end up changing yourself probably in ways that are so small. Right? That you don't even necessarily notice them. Like probably in your everyday life, you're going about it and you're like, I'm doing what I've always done, doing the stuff that has gotten me to this place. But you are probably on some level changing yourself in these small ways that maybe don't hurt you in the moment, but harm you as time goes on. And it becomes sort of like a stress fracture where like, you're just like, oh, I can't keep doing this. I can't. Yeah. Like
Emmanuel, you need to get into therapy. This is you have found. It's a different calling for you. It's because that, and so that is the crime of being Richard Pryor. Is those small changes to yourself that ultimately become a fracture.
Right, and it's one of those things for him too, where probably the more he leaned into, like, the Richard Pryor act, the stuff that had seemed maybe too risky to do in front of white people. Like, if you lean back into the thing that brought you peace or brought you a sense of fulfillment, what worked in the late 60s to sort of like get rid of your white fans and to connect with black people, by the time of the 80s and the 70s is something that white people are eager to lap in. They want to be in on the joke.
They want to be in on the joke. And you got, enough money to to have $1 million a year drug problem.
Right, right.
You might be losing track of who you are, period.
100%. There's no way you could possibly be who you are. Man.
So, and from here, it's interesting because, like, not long after that, so this is 1982, by, I think it was, like, in the mid-'80s, we now know he got diagnosed with MS. Do you know the film Harlem Nights?
Yeah. I know Harlem Nights. That is a wild film.
It is a wild film. I love this. So this is Eddie Murphy's first directing opportunity. This is an all-star cast of black comedians in the 80s. Richard Pryor, Eddie Murphy, Della Reese, Red Fox, like all of these legends get together, make a kind of slapstick comedy about like being gangsters in Harlem.
Right.
It's a total bomb in the box office, but is a cult classic amongst black people. And Richard Pryor in it is kind of not the funny one.
Yeah.
He kind of plays it straight. And Eddie Murphy has said in public that like he was frustrated by that in the filming.
Oh, like Eddie was frustrated by it. He's like, I want you to be the Richard Pryor I grew up with.
Who is my legend,
Right.
And he blamed like the film not, when it didn't get the kind of critical response that it was supposed to get. He's like, part of it, he's riffing on why. One of the things is like, I thought me and Richard were going to be on set, yucking it up, figuring things out, but Richard was just kind of clocking it in. And then Eddie says, like, I later discovered, like, he had just been diagnosed with MS.
Oh.
And we didn't know that, but he knew that. And so his decline was beginning. And so, he continued to be in the culture for a bit, but I don't remember when his last film was, but he starts to fade away. And it's just a tragedy, because I just think he would have still been such a great...
Because you're saying he was born in 1940?
Yeah.
So he's only 5 years older than George W. Bush.
Yeah, or take another example, Steve Martin.
Right.
He's 5 years older than Steve Martin, who is got a hit TV show right now, right? And is still actively making things. I think Richard Pryor would still be making things, and I wonder what he'd be doing, to push us, what kind of truths he'd be telling that we don't get, and that is also a little bit of the tragedy for me of that generation. There's so many of them,
Yeah, who burn out so young.
Burnt out,
Yeah. Wow.
Thank you for processing this with me.
Of course. It's interesting because where we're going next is, I think, kind of related. It speaks to a lot of similar ideas that we talked to today, but I think through a very different lens.
Okay.
And so I'm going to play a couple clips for you, and I'm curious if you know who we're going to talk about.
Let's do it. I'm ready.
All right, so this first one is from 2003,
I don't necessarily think it's specific to England. I think everywhere there's going to be people that are talented, that can really rhyme or can really make a beat, and then not necessarily in the forefront of the music industry. You know, it's just about who the record company is going to put out. You know, there's a lot of talented people everywhere.
Do you have any idea who this might be?
I recognize the voice and I'm trying to like put the person with it, but I'm like, I know that person.
Oh, all right. Well, we have another one, this time a couple of years later, from 2006.
I mean, when I go on stage, I like to dress as slutty as possible because it makes me dance better for some reason. But I do it because I'm an assertive young woman and I'm not trying to sell records based on the way I look. And that's why I do it, apart from the fact that I like dressing like a slut.
I like her. I like her, whoever she is. I don't know now. I've actually lost my way.
Listen, what you are having right now is the experience that millions of people around the world had when they first heard her, which was, I don't know who this is, but I love this woman and I want to hear more.
Okay.
I'll play one more clip.
All right.
I'm lucky that I can sing songs that make me happy, that I wrote about stuff that, you know, I'm lucky that I get to give myself therapy every day by singing songs about a really tough time in my life. Not everyone can do that. Everyone's got to go and talk about other people, you know. I'm very lucky.
Yeah. All right, so don't tell me now after these, but do you feel like you have an idea
I don't.
who it is? Wow. All right, well, we'll have to wait and see.
But I am very excited to find out. Big Lives is a production of BBC Studios and Pushkin Industries. It's hosted by me, Kai Wright, and Emmanuel Dzotsi. From BBC Studios, our producer is Emma Wetherill. Our archive producer is Samira Chowdhury. The sound designer is Melvin Rickaby. Executive producer is Annie Brown. Production coordinator is Galen Davis Connolly. And production manager is Mabel Finnegan Wright. From Pushkin Industries, our executive producer is Constanza Gallardo. Producer Daphne Chen. Legal advisor Jake Flanagan. And marketing by Morgan Ratner and Jordan McMillan.